In today's video, we're taking a look at how Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians are preparing to deter and defend themselves against a possible Russian aggression. What's the state of their military? And will the Baltic states be able to defend themselves against Russia? Our experts will answer these and other questions. Until recently, Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians accepted that if Russia occupied parts of their territory in the first phase of the conflict, it would take a few days before Allied forces liberated them. However, the events of the last 2 years have changed this approach. Today, none of these three countries could countenance even a temporary and partial occupation by the Russians. Together with their allies, they intend to defend each part of their territory from the very first minute. Several things are necessary for this to happen. The first is increasing their own capabilities. This table shows the defense expenditures of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. And as we can see, they have been growing dynamically.
It's obvious that in order to finance these new plans, it's necessary to increase spending. The NATO target of 2% of GDP for defense spending was already reached by the Baltic states in the last decade. The last was Latvia, which reached this level in 2019. This year, the new target is at least 3%, and Estonia is the most likely to achieve this goal, or perhaps already has.
This is a list of arms purchases by the Baltic states. What we immediately see is the large investment in land forces by all three countries. They already signed contracts in previous years that meet their needs. And all three countries, seeing what's going on in Ukraine, have made large purchases in air defense.
From the
point of view of the Baltic states, especially their economies, this is quite a big effort. We're talking about spending more than 2% of their GDP on defense. In the case of Estonia, it's already 3%. However, from a broader perspective, and especially in comparison with the Russian Federation or even Poland, these purchases are nevertheless quite small and unitary. For example, it's only 230 armoured vehicles, which will allow Estonia to equip one brigade, which again is a rather small force. Even before the full-scale war in Ukraine, the Russian Federation maintained a formation the size of an airborne division at the Estonian border.
Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia also want to increase the size of their armed forces and the active reserves. In the case of each of these countries, the situation is a little bit different. In Lithuania, conscription was reinstated in 2015, and since then, about 3,500 people are trained each year. And from 2026, that number will increase to 7,000. In Latvia, conscription was reinstated 2 years ago as one form of the so-called compulsory national service. In 2023, the first group of conscripts was 500 people and consisted of volunteers. And from January 2024, the Latvian state randomly selects about 600 candidates.
This does not always mean going into the military. A great example is Latvia, which has introduced parallel forms of national service. This is based on the Finnish model, so you don't necessarily have to serve in uniform in the field going to exercises. People can perform this duty to the state in other forms of service.
Conscription in Estonia has never been interrupted. Each year, 3,500 Estonians complete an 8 or 11-month service. In 2023, the number of recruits was increased to 4,000 per year, and there's also a discussion of extending the service to even 1.5 years, and including women in defense duty. This table shows the manpower of the armed forces of the Baltic states. The regular armed forces range from 7,300 soldiers in the case of Latvia to more than 15,000 in the case of Lithuania. However, these numbers are still insignificant when compared to the size of the Russian army.
Its strength far exceeded that of the armed forces of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia combined. Unfortunately, due to limitations in their demographics and economy, the armed forces of the individual Baltic states are unable to defend themselves on their own and require Allied support. These states are unable to maintain substantial forces in peacetime, and then during wartime and mobilization, they are unable to keep up forces large enough to conduct defense operations on their own. Here it's worth noting that the volunteer, auxiliary and territorial defense formations in these countries are usually larger than their ground troops. In the case of Latvia, the size of the stationed Allied troops, we're mainly talking about the Canadian Brigade, supported by troops from Poland, Denmark and Sweden, among others, will be about the same as Latvia's ground forces, but much better equipped and armed.
The presence of NATO troops on their territory is crucial for the Baltic states, even now in peacetime. Since 2017, the so-called NATO multinational battle groups have been present there. These are formations the size of a reinforced battalion, stationed in specific countries. These units include soldiers from many different allied countries. There is also a framework country that fields the most troops and is responsible for coordination and command. For the Baltic states, it was important to increase these NATO battle groups from battalion to brigade size. This has been partially successful. So what should NATO's presence in the region look like? The framework country in the case of Lithuania is Germany. In addition to the Germans, the multinational battle group includes the Netherlands, Norway, Belgium, the Czech Republic, and Luxembourg. Germany has also decided to permanently deploy a tank battalion, mechanized battalion, and support subunits in Lithuania. This is how, together with the NATO battle group, they will form a new brigade. The German presence is to be gradually expanded and reach full operational readiness by the end of 2027. Ultimately, the brigade is to have about 5,000 personnel permanently stationed there with their families. In Lithuania, US troops on a permanent rotation are also stationed, and this is about 600 soldiers. In Latvia, Canada is the framework nation. They are expanding the NATO battle group, which is the largest among the Baltic states. In addition to 1,000 Canadians, the group includes Spaniards, Italians, Poles, Slovaks, Slovenes, Czechs, Albanians, Montenegrins, Macedonians, and an Icelander. By 2026, 2,200 Canadian soldiers are to be stationed in Latvia, but with a rotational presence, and also supported by the Swedes and Danes. There are also US troops operating in Latvia, but only to support 5 helicopters detached from the US Army's rotating Combat Aviation Brigade. In Estonia, the United Kingdom is the framework country. It's supported alternately by France and Denmark. Here, the formula is a little different. Estonians failed to negotiate an increase in the presence of British troops on their territory. However, a different formula has been worked out. There will be a standby force in the UK, ready for a quick redeployment to Estonia, along with those forces already stationed in Estonia in their current form, and together they will form a brigade. For the Estonians, it's also important to have the presence of Americans, who are there in connection to the HIMARS platoon. Their presence today is one thing, but what's equally important is what happens in a crisis. NATO is working on the so-called regional defense plans. As a result, certain military units of Western countries will be assigned to specific sections of the front. Such units would be on standby for rapid redeployment when the need arises. They must also create the conditions to receive Allied troops.
Jak już wspominałem, to jest potrzebne do zwiększenia obecności sojuszników.
As I have already mentioned, in order to increase the Allied presence on the territory of Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, it's necessary to expand the military infrastructure. I'm mainly referring to training grounds, garrison centres, which allow the armed forces to come in greater numbers, to have somewhere to stay overnight, to live, and, most importantly, to train. If we were to make a list, in Estonia the most important investments underway now are the training ground in Nursipalu and in the southeast in Võru. Another major investment is taking place in Latvia. It's a training ground or garrison training ground outpost in what is called Salonia, located in the central southern part of the country, southeast of Riga. The third case is Lithuania. Here, this development of military infrastructure is the largest and the most new outposts are being created. We're talking about, for example, 3 garrison towns to serve the Allied forces and their own forces. This is the development of 2 training ground complexes near Kaunas, which will become one complex, and the revitalization of the old Soviet training ground near Vilnius. It will now be used for exercises for NATO troops coming to Lithuania.
But will this be enough for the Baltic states to defend themselves against a Russian attack?
Significant steps have been made in the last 2 years, but they are not yet complete. The equipment purchased by the Baltic states has not yet arrived in the countries. It has to be manufactured. Soldiers must undergo training on it, and units must team up and practice. The German brigade in Lithuania will not be fully deployed until 2027. On the other hand, the armed forces of the Russian Federation have also suffered significant losses in Ukraine, and at this point it seems that they are not able to fight another war, which after all would mean a full-scale war with NATO on a second front. So at this point, these are proportional measures, but it's still a process that is ongoing and will continue in the coming years, and perhaps into the next decade.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to follow more stories like this one from the region.